My mother thinks of me as inhuman, doesn't she? I suppose she's told you that I'm mad and that I have to be locked away like this for everybody's sake. Oh, why shouldn't she? And why shouldn't you believe her? You see, mademoiselle, this castle, these mountains, the dark acres of forest, even the valleys below, belong to me. They are my inheritance. I am Baron Meister. Could you find the key that fits this? Do you dare?
Yes, I dare.
Hi, I'm Bobby, and welcome to Dusty Old Movies. In the late 50s through the early 70s, Hammer was the horror studio. They used to have their own magazine called Dark Terrors, and in the final issue, they voted The Brides of Dracula as the best Hammer film of all time. It's the first sequel to the 1958 classic Horror of Dracula. And strangely enough, Dracula's not even in it. But the atmosphere is so striking that even I don't mind.
When Universal made Dracula's Daughter, Dracula wasn't in it because he had died at the end of the original. But when Hammer's Dracula remake was such a hit, it was now common practice to bring the monster back for the sequel.
Jimmy Sangster, who wrote Horror of Dracula, wrote a script called Disciple of Dracula, where a vampire hunter named Latour tries to revive the spirit of Count Dracula to destroy his faithless follower Baron Meister.
Now, depending on who you talk to, this is a bit of a mystery. According to Howard Maxford, Christopher Lee turned down the role of Dracula because he was concerned about being typecast. But according to Richard Golan, they chose not to include him because his agent kept asking for more money. Regardless of the real reason, the new writer, Peter Bryan, was instructed to take the Count out of the story. But he brought back his adversary, Peter Cushing, as Professor Van Helsing.
Peter Cushing was more than happy to come back, but he did request a couple changes. He tended to dislike Jimmy Sangster's dialogue, so they hired a new writer, Edward Percy, whom had worked with Peter Cushing, to do a rewrite. And he objected to the ending, where Professor Van Helsing calls upon the forces of hell to create a swarm of bats to destroy Count Dracula. Peter Cushing felt that made no sense, so they got rid of it. And I agree, I don't think that character would call upon Satan.
For efficiency, Hammer would typically film movies back-to-back using the same crew. And as Terence Fisher and the rest of the crew were wrapping up the Two Faces of Dr. Jekyll, the sets were already being constructed for the Brides of Dracula. And filming started just 4 days after Dr. Jekyll ended. They spent a great deal of time building this very impressive and realistic-looking fake bat. Unfortunately, they lost it, so they had to use this one instead.
Expensive and long for Hammer, the budget was £120,000 with an 8-week shooting schedule. They used all 4 of their sound stages and the backlot. And aside from the fake bat, every bit of it shows on screen.
Mary Ann is going to be a student teacher at a girls' school. But while she's ordering her dinner at the inn, her carriage leaves without her. Baroness Meister invites Mary Ann to her castle for the night, and she'll be taken to the school in the morning. But in a locked-off section of the castle, she finds the Baroness's son, Baron Meister, who is chained up. Mary Ann finds the key and allows the Baron to escape, but unbeknownst to her, the Baron is a vampire, and he bites his own mother. Professor Van Helsing finds Mary Ann lying on the ground, so he takes her to the school. Upon seeing his victims, Van Helsing figures out that Baron Meister is the vampire, and tracks him down to the school. But Mary Ann and the Baron are already engaged.
The old woman began to howl frightfully. Gretel ran away. Then the old godless witch burned up miserably. Oh, here's another zinger. The wolf lifted the latch. The door sprang open, and without saying a word, he went to the grandmother's bed and devoured her. I love children's entertainment. These quotes are from Grimm Brothers fairy tales, Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood. And as you could tell, these fairy tales in their original form have a scary side. And the Brides of Dracula has that same dark fairy tale quality.
The atmosphere begins with these very artistic opening credits. The picture of the castle looks like a book illustration, and we get this opening narration about Transylvania, just like how fairy tales begin with Once Upon a Time.
Transylvania, land of dark forests, red mountains, and black unfathomed lakes. Still the home of magic and devilry as the 19th century draws to its close. Count Dracula, monarch of all vampires, is dead, but his disciples live on to spread the cult and corrupt the world.
These European sets are so magnificent and detailed, especially the castle. And the colors, like the reds and the purples, just pop. You feel like you're transplanted into another world. The characters feel like they're out of a fairy tale too. Even though the actor David Peel was 40, holy dentures, Batman! He looks like he's a 20-year-old Prince Charming. Gina even refers to him as Prince Charming. Now the genders are reversed, but like a princess, he's held captive in the castle, and the innocent and naive Mary Ann has to rescue him. The one who holds him captive is Baroness Meister, who is like an evil queen. And just like in Little Red Riding Hood, where the grandma is really a wolf, the big scares come when these innocent-looking faces suddenly have fangs and are bloodthirsty vampires. And Van Helsing is like the huntsman.
It has the magic and charm of the best of Disney, but with the violence, the blood, and the excitement of horror. I think it's irresistible. Now, Count Dracula is one of the greatest villains of classic literature, and making a sequel without him is a gamble. When I watched Dracula's Daughter, I wish Dracula was in it. But as much as I love Christopher Lee, I'm fine without him. Because the Baron and Baroness are so rooted in those classical qualities that they feel like a worthy replacement, and they feel like a worthy adversary for Professor Van Helsing. And speaking of Professor Van Helsing, let's talk about Peter Cushing. Because monsters are so groovy, sometimes playing the hero in a horror film could be a thankless role. But not with Peter Cushing as Professor Van Helsing. He is one of the horror genre's greatest protagonists. You sympathize with him, the way he's so kind and patient with people. He has this air of wisdom and purity.
Just like Edward Van Sloan does in the original Dracula, his authority allows you to suspend your disbelief. But Peter Cushing goes even further and brings this dynamic element. Van Sloan was the old professor. Peter Cushing is this exciting vampire hunter. When he's listening to someone talk, you could tell his mind is on fire. He's thinking and making conclusions. And even though he was middle-aged, physically he's a powerhouse. He runs, he jumps, and fights vampires. When Baron Meister bites him, he has the mental and physical stamina to burn it off himself.
As long as they didn't get too batty, he would sometimes do his own stunts, and he was really into making sure his wardrobe was right.
And just like a superhero's costume, his fur coat is unforgettable. Along with our very dapper hero, the villain that I find most intriguing is Martina Hunt as Baroness Meister. While Count Dracula took some inspiration from Vlad the Impaler, Baroness Meister seems to be inspired by Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who hired local girls as servants, tortured them, killed them, and bathed in their blood. Rub-a-dub-dub. And this Baroness is also bringing home girls, but for her son to feed upon.
Her introduction is so striking. You hear her carriage stop outside, and she comes into the inn. She's imperious, she's in control, and has this quiet authority. Everything she says to Marianne is nice and polite. But the fear in the innkeeper's and his wife's face tells you how evil she is.
Don't open it!
I must. Wine. Won't you join me?
Thank you, but I...
Another glass! So you're going to the laying school at Bolstein? If you please, I was mistaken. We have a room, if... I cannot take you there tonight, but I can see that you get there in the morning. In the meantime, you can't stay in a poor place like this. I am Baroness Meister. My castle's in the hills just above the village. Please give me the pleasure of being my guest tonight.
Martina Hunt became famous for her portrayal of Miss Havisham in Great Expectations, and she brings a similar reclusiveness and air of regret to Baroness Meister.
They keep it vague and mysterious, but she encouraged her son to hang out with an evil crowd. She even hung out with them, and somehow this crowd turned him into a vampire. Now she protects him. She brings him girls from the village to feed upon, but she never sees him. She hates what he's become and is afraid of him. So there's a lot of layers to Baroness Meister. She even comments that she wishes the god could bless her. And when the Baron turns her into a vampire, she is happy that Professor Van Helsing is going to stake her, because that means she will finally find peace.
Martina Hunt did not like wearing fangs, so she covers her mouth for most of the scene, but visually it adds to the shame of the character. Now, in the original Dracula, I love Dwight Frye as Dracula's slave Renfield. And in Horror of Dracula, they don't include the Renfield character, and I really missed him. But in Brides of Dracula, they do their own version of the insane vampire servant, Frida Jackson as Greta.
When the Baron was a little boy, Greta was his nurse, and she continues to take care of him. Now, in the beginning of the movie, when the Baroness is still alive, Greta is like the creepy servant. But she still does normal things, like she makes dinner and stuff. But after the Baroness dies, she is cut off from the living and goes completely batty. And her whole existence becomes about being the caregiver and really the mother figure to the Baron and the other vampires. And just like Dwight Frye, she has a spooky look and a crazy laugh that are unforgettable. Wake up! Wake up! Are you about ready? No, I can't help you. You've got to be strong. I know it's dark, but we've got to push! 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 One little effort more. Push! There's my precious. There's my little love. The master's waiting. There's my beauty. Come on, you've got to push. Push. There's the clever one. There's my clever one. Those are just my favorites, but from big part to small, every character is memorable and perfectly cast. And along with the actors, I also love how action-packed this movie is. In England, The Brides of Dracula was rated Certificate X, so you had to be 16 or older to go see it. But Hammer knew that in the loosey-goosey United States, that they would have a huge teenage audience. So they made it to appeal to young people. The vampire looks young, the story moves fast, and it is filled with action. It opens with a carriage racing to the village, and they stop because they find a dead body on the ground. So exciting right away. Peter Cushing is like an action hero, so there are fight scenes, and the climax is just spectacular.
Van Helsing burns Baron Meister's face with holy water, so you get this great scary makeup. Then, Baron Meister knocks over these hot coals to start the windmill on fire. He runs out, and then Van Helsing jumps onto the blade of the windmill to make a cross and destroy Baron Meister.
It's outrageous and silly, but really groovy.
Because there were so many rewrites, there are some plot holes. Like, how did Marianne get in the middle of the forest, but doesn't remember that Baron Meister is a vampire? And who is this guy who jumps on the back of Marianne's carriage in the beginning? Apparently this character was Latour, the original hero and the disciple of Dracula's script. They more or less dropped his character, but this sequence was left in.
They kind of figured that the kids in the audience wouldn't care. And honestly, the movie is so much fun that I really don't care either.
From what I learned about the behind the scenes, it seemed like a really fun set. Peter Cushing would joke around, David Peel almost swallowed his fangs, and Martina Hunt would practice yoga. Christopher Lee would return as Count Dracula in 6 more films for Hammer. And Peter Cushing came back as Van Helsing for 3 more, 2 with Christopher Lee, and then for the martial arts version of Dracula, The Legend of the Seventh Golden Vampires. For those interested in what the original ending with the swarm of bats would have been like, Hammer reused the idea for the climax in The Kiss of the Vampire.
So I give this movie 3.5 brides out of 4. Thank you for watching Dusty Old Movies, and enjoy your stay at Meister Castle.